Hey, it's Vanessa Vaughn, the founder and chief resilience officer of Asfalis Advisors. We're here for another episode for the Crisis Corner Cafe, speaking on the topic of the Alabama and Georgia abortion bills. Again, these are informal videos designed to bring awareness and to engage the chief security officers, the risk officers, your operating officers, general counsel, as well as those of you who may be responsible for economic development, mayors, city managers, county managers, those of you who have a role to play as it relates to politics and government. And so I'm excited to have this conversation and to shed some light. So we always like to begin with the end in mind. And what I want to make sure that everyone is clear about is as of May 2019, neither of these abortion bills have been passed into law. So it's currently not a law, okay? At this point in time, it may take another 6 months to a year for this to actually pass. So it's a great time to have the discussions and think about what we can do as citizens in the United States of America. So Alabama had about 25 men who were really the folks that really pushed this bill where it actually is today. And so the number one question that most women have is, what's wrong with that picture? 25 men who don't know what it's like to be pregnant, right? Talk about design thinking and doing with and not for. So interesting perspective to kind of add on to that. Doctors in the state of Alabama would not be able to perform this procedure once a fetus is in utero. And so they have really changed the dynamics of the abortion bill. Also, people who are pregnant due to rape or incest would not be exempt as they are in other states. And so that's another challenge that we see with the Alabama abortion bill. Also, the law targets doctors, meaning that they will be prosecuted for performing an abortion and could potentially face a felony punishable for up to 99 years in prison. So they are really targeting doctors throughout this particular bill. They also took it one step further to say, under that new legislation, all it requires is that a woman to be pregnant. It doesn't matter how many weeks, how many days. If you are pregnant, then that means that you would be unable to have an abortion. It would be against the law in the state of Alabama. And so these things are adding up to the reputational narrative and the challenges that some people think about when we think about the history of Alabama as a part of the Union, as a part of the United States, and the southern parts of the United States. And many of you may be wondering, well, why is this even a topic of conversation? If you have not done your research, please go back and read, and I will leave a link in the bottom as it relates to birth dearth, which is essentially a study that has come up over many years that talks about the decline of birth rates across the United States. And so some would say that these abortion bills are not necessarily social bills, but they're political bills where the United States government is utilizing their power, legislation, and policy to make sure that the majority actually stays a majority. Again, go back and do your own personal research, but you should kind of understand where this is all stemming from. So getting back to the end in mind, like Alabama, Georgia explicitly states that doctors who perform an abortion will be prosecuted as well. However, in their particular bill, it is not explicitly clear as to what that penalty would be or that particular punishment. The recent state of abortion bills actually try to ban abortion early into pregnancy. And for Georgia, they are specifically down to 6 weeks. So once you're down to 6 weeks, that is considered you are no longer going to be able to have an abortion in the state of Georgia if, again, that bill is actually written into law. And so what has happened? Well, celebrities, film producers, companies are actually boycotting doing business in Georgia today as I speak. They are taking their business elsewhere. They don't want to film there. They don't want to record there because they don't want to suppress the women in their companies to be a part of a state who has that level of extreme legislation, policy, and politics going on. And so immediately we already see the impact that this has to businesses. Well, I live in the state of North Carolina, and Asfalis Advisors is headquartered in Charlotte. And many of you may remember the North Carolina HB2 crisis that happened in this state. And some of it is still looming here. Essentially, a state law in North Carolina required transgender people to use restrooms corresponding to the sex of their birth certificates. And it caused a huge uproar. And the Associated Press actually estimated that the law cost North Carolina about $3 billion in economic development, to include PayPal, who was going to spend $2.6 billion here, multiple concerts, the NCAA, the NAACP, dozens of conventions and sporting events totaling about $11 million were supposed to be in the state of North Carolina and did not come. Adidas, multiple banks, some of them were bringing in 450 jobs, $543 million in economic development funds, and none of this happened. And so these are the impacts when there's misalignment with the state that you live in and the politics and the legislation and how that directly impacts business in your local communities. So, Vanessa, what's the impact of these laws on my business? Well, from a business perspective, the reputation of your local or public officials directly impact your business. That is why, as business people, it is important for you to be engaged and involved from that perspective. Secondly, many companies in the state of Alabama have already mentioned that it will be hard, as it already is hard, for them to continuously try to recruit people to move to the state of Alabama, right? What's the value of moving to a state of Alabama when you live in other states across the United States that have less stringent laws, right? Why would I move there? What's the goal? And again, and you have to think about the culture and the history of our southern states and how we see that, meaning we as in people across the country. How do all these things play a factor and play a role? Okay. So think about that as you kind of talk to your public officials, your business, folks. How are you going to now leverage this situation? If you're in Alabama or if you're in Georgia, how are you going to kind of talk through and discuss the different angles that these bills kind of bring to the surface? And so what are some of those things that you all need to be considering? Well, number one, anti-business social legislation actually plays an important role as it relates to corporate site selection decisions every day. So now other states have leverage and they can now think through, well, hey, why would you go to Alabama? Yeah, your taxes may be lower. Yeah, it may be a lower cost of living, but also think about the impact to your workforce. How many women are you bringing to that particular state? How many millennials will these jobs attract? Do you really think and believe that those people may be adapt to living in that type of culture and that environment? That's only for your workforce that you're trying to attract. They're going to have to think about that. Also, states who are competing for new industries will definitely, again, use this ban against Alabama to negotiate with other companies. And so I want to know what you think. If you're an entrepreneur, if you're a business owner, if you're in corporate security, if you're in operations, if you're in human resources, right? What's happening in your company? How have these conversations come up? If you're responsible for crisis management or business continuity or enterprise security risk, how are you leveraging this conversation with your leadership team? What are those thoughts? What are you guys thinking about? Again, my name is Vanessa Vaughn, the founder and chief resilience officer of Asfalis Advisors. I would love to get your thoughts and your inputs. If you've enjoyed this conversation and know that this is something that's missing from your company, please do us a favor. Go to our website and contact us and book Vanessa Vaughn as your next speaker for your organization. Thank you for tuning in.